Before we begin this webinar, we'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land and pay our respects to elders past and present, and also extend that respect to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people listening today. My name is Kerry, and I work in the Legal Aid New South Wales Community Legal Education team. I'm joined today by Rachel. Rachel is a lawyer in the Your Story Disability Legal Support team. Hi, Rachel.
Hi, everyone.
We're also joined by Tanya, who is an Auslan interpreter, helping us out today. Hi, Tanya. Rachel and I would like to point out that today's webinar is not providing individual advice. If you have questions after doing the webinar about your or a client's individual circumstances, you can contact Your Story. We'll provide all the contact details later in the webinar. On the control panel, there's a number of handouts which you're welcome to download. One is a copy of the slides we're going to be using today. The other is the new storybook that we've developed for Your Story about preparing a submission and other ways that you can tell your story to the Royal Commission. And there's also an ideas for preparing submission resource that Your Story has developed. So we're going to start with a quick poll just to find out something about you all. So our poll question that's coming up now is, have you ever assisted a client to prepare a submission to the Disability Royal Commission? I'm just waiting for people's responses. Okay, so it looks like we've got all the responses. Can you see that, Rachel?
Yes, I can. So it looks as though we've got a fair few people who haven't yet. So hopefully today you'll hear some of our tips and ideas to make that process a little less overwhelming.
That's right. Okay, so we'll hide that and bring up our next slide. The purpose of today's webinar is to talk about making a submission to the Disability Royal Commission, some of our tips and how Your Story can offer support. Some of the topics we're going to cover include who can make a submission, how a submission can be made, some ideas about what to include in a submission, ideas about things to think about to safely make a submission, the type of service and support Your Story can provide to people with a disability, their carers, family or supporters when thinking about or preparing a submission. Did you want to add anything, Rachel, to that?
Just, Kerry, that there's really no single approach to preparing a submission. What we've done here is try to collate some of our tips and lessons that we've learnt along the way to see if we can assist somewhat to simplify the process a little.
Okay, so my first question to you, Rachel, is who can make a submission?
Anybody can, Kerry. The Royal Commission wants to hear about experiences of violence, abuse, neglect, and exploitation of people with disability in all settings and contexts. I'm sure that many of the people listening know that the scope of this Royal Commission is really wide, and it's not restricted to looking at any one particular institution or any one particular area of life. Some settings that people might talk about, maybe community and residential settings, their home, mental health facilities, hospitals, schools, transport, aged care services. The list can go on and on.
Okay, but what about young people or people subject to a guardianship order or some other type of order about their independent decision making? Can they make a submission?
There's no age limit on who can prepare a submission, and the Royal Commission is certainly encouraging children as well as young people to engage with them. often a young person may benefit from having some legal advice about the best and the safest way for them to tell their story, which may not necessarily be via a public submission. I recommend supporting young people to engage with us and to engage with your story in the event that they would like to tell their story and engage with the Royal Commission. With submissions, the Royal Commission is not assessing people's capacity like they would, say, if you were at court or say if you were involved in a legal matter. There's no specific capacity test that a person has to meet in order to make a submission and engage with the Royal Commission. A submission is often about somebody's personal experience. So people don't need to establish credibility or the fact that their story, the facts of their story in order to share it. Different to making a submission, the Royal Commission may assess credibility and capacity in the event that they're asking somebody to appear as a witness at one of their public hearings. It's important for people when they're sharing stories to tell the facts as they remember them. We'll talk a bit later on about attaching things to submissions as well, Kerry.
Okay, thanks, Rachel. And can people make submissions on behalf of other people, like a carer or advocate on behalf of the person with the disability?
Yes, you can. However, if you're telling somebody else's story, you should get their permission to do so in the event that that person will be identifiable from that submission. There can, however, be different submissions made about the same event from different people with different perspectives. So, for example, a parent and a child may make a submission about their experiences with the child's school. The parent could tell the story from their perspective, and the child could tell the story from their perspective. Advocates may often be supporting clients to make a submission. We certainly know that there are some cases where advocates may want to make a submission themselves about an event or events that they've been a part of when working alongside a client. This may happen, for example, with an advocate who was working with a client who's since passed away. In the event that that occurs, advocates or carers or family members can certainly make a submission about the experiences of that person. However, if they don't have the client's consent, or in that example, the family's consent, then it's best not to identify that person in the submission. When de-identifying submissions and exactly what you need to do to make that happen, it really depends on individual circumstances, and we certainly encourage people to talk to your story if they have a case where they want to make a submission and they've got some questions about de-identifying and how the privacy of that information can be protected.
Okay, thanks, Rachel. It sounds like the Disability Royal Commission is keen to hear from lots of different people about their experiences of violence, abuse, neglect, and exploitation as a person with disability. But I also understand that the Royal Commission is interested in hearing about people's experiences during the COVID-19 restrictions. Is that right?
Yes, it is. They've released an issues paper that's called Emergency Planning and Response that you can find on their website, and it's got some questions there that you can respond to. You can also continue to send in submissions during COVID-19. There's no end date as well for when submissions can be sent in at this stage.
Okay. Thank you. I've got one question here. Well, one person has said that they've recently worked with you, Rachel, on getting some assistance, and it's nice to put a face to a name. That's
Oh, that's lovely. That's good.
the other question is, where an advocate has assisted in the transcribing of a submission, should the client sign the bottom to make it clear that it's their submission words and not those of the advocate?
They can. They don't have to. If it's a matter for that client as to whether they wish to or not.
Okay. So now we're going to talk, Rachel, about the steps. We can see on this slide there's a number of steps in preparing and making a submission to the Royal Commission. Do you want to tell us about those steps, Rachel?
So, Kerry, to start off with, there's really no right or wrong way. We've had clients and advocates contacting us, asking really, how do I get started? Because understandably, a lot of people have never made a submission to a Royal Commission before. So what we've done in response is create this 6-step process that people may find helpful to follow along with. So we've got step 1, which is really think about your story. What is it that you want to share and how do you want to share it? Number 2, get some legal support in the event that you're concerned about sharing any of your story. Now, step 2 might not apply to everyone because understandably there are some people that may not have concerns. Step 3, share your story, then include any attachments. Make sure you're clear about your confidentiality. And then the last step, send your submission in. What we'll do next, Kerry, is work through these steps using a fictional case study about a character, Samir. For those of you who attended last week's, you might remember Samir and his story. He's a person with cerebral palsy who did not receive medical treatment when he attended a hospital because the nurse and doctor there did not listen to him. He wants to share his story, but he's concerned about retribution and any consequences that might follow.
Okay, thanks, Rachel. And as I said earlier, we've attached a PDF copy of the storybook resource, which includes Samir's story. The storybook actually explains 4 people's experience engaging with your story and the Royal Commission. And Samir's story starts at page 3, and you'll see that on the slide, the first part of his story. And we're planning to have this resource available on our website, and so that advocates can use it to explain when and why someone might contact your story and some of the different ways to engage with the Royal Commission. So there's a PDF version of the storybook plus a flipbook version that will be going up on the website. So let's go to step 1. Here we go. Thanks, Rachel. Do you want to take us through this step?
So step 1 is really start off by thinking about what the most important message to the Royal Commission is. What does your client really want to share, and what do they want the Royal Commission to take away? Every story is important. It's important that the Royal Commission hears from people about their personal experiences. In Samir's case, he might decide that his most important message is that medical staff do not interact appropriately with people with disability and make incorrect assumptions. He might recommend that they receive training. And this recommendation and his most important message could guide the structure of his submission and really serve as a starting point.
Okay. And so what is important is to include in the submission so it meets the Commission's terms of reference. What is important?
I'm sure what I have included on this slide is not new to many people listening, but I'll just work through it quickly. What the Royal Commission is investigating is how to prevent and better protect people with disability from being hurt, treated badly, refused help, or taken advantage of. How to achieve best practice in responding, investigating, and reporting cases where people with disability have been hurt, treated badly, refused help, taken advantage of, and how to promote a more inclusive society. So to start his thinking, Samir could really have a think about each of these, and for him, his most important message is his experience of what happened at the hospital. There are some people like Samir who contact us and have very specific stories about very specific times and days where certain events have happened. Other people have a lifetime of experiences and are stressed at the thought of having to include a lifetime of stories and dates and weren't really sure where to start. For those people, what might be useful as well is the issues papers that the Royal Commission have published. They ask specific questions and address topics such as health, education, justice. And for Samir, I would certainly recommend that he have a read over the health paper, because that might highlight for him some other messages that he wants to share or other things that he wants to talk about. So our experience is for those people that have a lifetime of messages and lots of things that they want to share, there's ways that you can do that, and by having a read of the issues papers, they might help, I guess, put some points down about each of those experiences to make it easier to share.
Okay. Thanks, Rachel. The only question I've got is whether the resources will be available in hard copy. We weren't planning on publishing them in hard copy, but they're definitely there for people to download and print off for their own use. So we'll now go to step 2, Rachel. So Rachel, sorry.
Oh, no.
What if someone is helping their client to write a submission and the client or they are worried about the implications of sharing the story? How can your story help?
So, Kerry, every client has their own story to share, and every story is different. So what we actually do is take the time to listen to the particular circumstances of that client and then support them with ideas and legal advice about how to safely share their story. Not everyone will need to talk to a lawyer, but in the event that clients or you are concerned about anything, then it's useful to get some legal advice earlier on. I've just put on the slide some of the common things that people might be concerned about and some of the common things that we can give legal advice about. And they're naming names, defamation, non-disclosure or legal agreements, concerns about payback or retribution, and concerns about safety, privacy, and compensation. Your Story team is culturally safe and multidisciplinary. We're free and we're nationwide, so we've got lawyers all over Australia. We work with our clients to understand what their preferences are and how they can achieve that in sharing their story. Samir might contact us to get some legal advice about things such as naming the names of the hospital and the medical staff, his concerns about being denied treatment in the future in the event that the hospital knows that he's told the Royal Commission about their poor service. Our advice then to Samir might be about how he could share his story in a restricted way or in a de-identified way, or different ways that he can share his story privately or to have additional legal protections. Your story is different to the Royal Commission, so we're not the same as the legal team who works with the Royal Commission. They often give advice and help witnesses who are appearing in the public hearings. They're not really involved in people making submissions. We're flexible, Kerry, and we're flexible in the way that we give our advice. For those of you who have talked to us before, we can talk to clients on the phone, via Skype. We're not doing face-to-face appointments at the moment due to COVID-19. However, we're still encouraging people to contact us in the event that that's a way that they wish to receive advice, and we'll certainly take down their name, and as soon as restrictions are lifted, make contact to get that arranged. We can also arrange, Kerry, interpreters. Tanya's here today, helpfully interpreting for us, and we're happy for people to be supported in their appointments by advocates, family members, support people, whoever that may be.
Great. Thanks, Rachel. And I should mention too that the email that is following the webinar for everyone who's attending today has links to the Your Story website and particular pages that have frequently asked questions and also the fact sheets that you've developed on a number of these topics. So I've got a couple of questions, Rachel. Can you clarify what you mean by non-disclosure?
Non-disclosure is often a legal agreement where it says that people can't discuss or share with others what the contents of the agreement are. Some non-disclosure agreements can be quite wide and can actually restrict people from sharing their story. So in the event that you or you have a client who has something like that, then we certainly encourage you to talk to us, because we can give you some individual advice on that.
And the other question, Rachel, is does the Disability Royal Commission legal team support people when they're speaking at private sessions as well? I think you mentioned the public sessions. What about private sessions?
That's certainly something that we could give legal advice on, and that's certainly something that we do. The Royal Commission has their own team that deals with private sessions. So if you have questions about that, you can either contact them or alternatively talk to us to get some advice.
Okay. All right, so we'll go on to our next step. So Rachel, tell us how people can make their submissions.
You can choose to do one submission, you can choose to do many submissions. So, for example, for Samir, say that he wanted to share his experience at the hospital, as well as talk about his experience with the NDIS, physical barriers to accessibility, as well as his ideas on how to improve things. He may choose to make 4 separate submissions, or he may choose to make one. Submissions can be in any form. They can be in writing, a picture, an audio clip, a video clip, a combination of those. It's really about making your submission in the way that suits your client and in a way that makes it easiest for you to tell your story. You can use the submission form that's on the Royal Commission's website. However, you don't have to. And lastly, Kerry, just to highlight that you can prepare a submission in any language you want. The Royal Commission have said that they will translate that, and you can certainly do your submission in the same language that you would use to chat to a friend.
That's great. Thanks, Rachel. I haven't had any additional questions, so what we'll do is we'll now move on to your tips on making your submission. So Rachel, can you take us through some ideas on how people could structure their submission to the Royal Commission?
Headings can often help someone share their story and often help the Royal Commission to understand it. People are, however, certainly encouraged to tell their story as best as they remember it and in a way that works for them. What we've found is useful is people can choose to structure their story in chronological order. Often clients have a letter that they've written to, say, a hospital and a response that they received, and they have a date at the top, and clients may find it helpful to start there and then to work around those dates. You could structure your submission around topics such as education, health, service providers, or you could structure it such as what happened, what I did, the response, what worked, what didn't. So there's lots of ideas, Kerry.
Okay. Thanks, Rachel. I've got a question here. Last week we heard that a client could give a verbal submission by contacting your story. Am I mistaken? Is that right?
What you can do is ring up the Royal Commission and you can make a submission via telephone. So that would be calling the Royal Commission directly.
Okay.
And then somebody on the other line would transcribe that.
Okay. All right. Someone's written here, do you have a copy of a submission unidentified or de-identified?
We don't, Kerry, as they vary so much depending on what somebody's story is, what they want to share. As I said, some people want to share their story about a particular day and an event, and some want to talk about a lifetime of experiences. So it very much depends on the story of that particular client.
Yes.
So unfortunately, we don't have a template.
No, but we do have that resource, the PDFs on you as a handout, ideas for preparing your submission. And we're going to be talking about attachments in a little while. What's this one? Can you still tell your story to the Disability Royal Commission even if the incident already been taken to a tribunal? This example is Queensland CAT, like our NCAT in New South Wales.
Yes, yes, you can. However, I would certainly encourage you to get some legal advice because we might want to talk about how to share your story in a way that ensures it's shared safely.
Okay, and someone, our Brains Trust of people online today has said you have to make an appointment to make a phone submission. The wait is about 10 days. So they just wanted us to be clear about that. So that's good to know. If you're writing a submission, doesn't matter how long it is.
No, there's no particular length you have to meet, Kerry. However, in the event that your submission is long, then I would certainly encourage thinking about headings or thinking about how to structure it, but there's no set length.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right, well, let's have a look now, Rachel, at how Samir might structure his. Is that right? Is that what we're going to be looking at? Or just tell us about these tips?
Some tips. So, Kerry, these are some tips that we lawyers use to make legal documents easier to read. They're useful for submissions as they can make it easier for the Royal Commission to reference parts of a submission or find it again. Once again, they're not necessary, just some options that you might want to think about. So they're there starting each new thought in a new paragraph, numbering each paragraph, page numbers, dating the document. If somebody decides to make more than one submission, so maybe one submission now and another one in, say, a year's time, these tips may make it easier to point the Royal Commission to something that you've said in a previous submission rather than having to repeat everything again.
Okay. Someone's asked if you write a submission, can you also request a private session?
You can. However, as I understand from the Royal Commission that they're not sure as to how many private sessions that they will have, so there's no guarantee that you will receive a private session. But
Okay.
yes, you can.
And someone's asked, is your story able to help review and provide advice on a person's draft submission before it's submitted?
Yes. So often clients and advocates contact us and send in a draft of their submission and say things like, I have concerns about the naming names, and I've got some concerns about this and this and this. And what we do is we review it and then we chat and can provide some individual advice.
Okay. And someone's written, can advocates submit generic submissions around certain institutions and issues people with disability face, for example, in child protection?
Yes, yes. So what I said before was really about whether those submissions are identifying someone, but in the event that they're generic, then yes, of course they can.
Okay, thanks. So I can see a key message on the yellow note on our slide is that people should share their experiences in a way that best suits them, as a summary of what you've just said, Rachel. So let's go to step 4. I think that's where we're up to, including attachments. So Rachel, I understand that some people might want to include attachments with their submission. Can you explain to us how that works?
Yes. So to start off with, you don't have to attach anything. You can certainly attach documents or pictures in support of your story. However, as I said before, you don't have to establish credibility in order to send in a submission. What we recommend is asking yourself, what does this attachment add to the story? And consider confidentiality and privacy. For Samir, if we talk about him again, it wouldn't be useful to attach his complete medical history and personal medical history, but what he might choose to do is attach, say, the discharge summary from the hospital. He would want to look at the hospital records. There's a lot of personal information and a lot of personal details in hospital records. So he might end up choosing not to attach anything, and that's completely fine as well.
Okay. So Rachel, can your story help someone decide what to attach to their submission?
Your story can provide legal advice to people in the event that they're concerned about whether they can attach documents that they've received from other people or other organisations, or if they're concerned about how to safely send in attachments. The Royal Commission wants to hear stories, so rather than just sending in a lot of attachments with no story, we would certainly encourage people such as Samir to share their experiences and suggestions for change, because that means that the Royal Commission can understand how he was treated badly and how things can improve. So he might choose to attach, say, a letter of complaint that he wrote to the hospital and the response, whether that was an apology or some other response.
Okay. Someone's asked that if you choose not to attach documents, can the Royal Commission ask to see them?
That's probably more a question for the submissions team at the Royal Commission. But
Okay.
as I understand it, if they've got questions about your submission, then they certainly will ask those.
Okay. Well, we'll go on to the next slide. To be clear about confidentiality. So Rachel, I know many people want to know how submissions are going to be protected by the Royal Commission. Can you explain this important step to our audience today?
So, Kerry, page 4 and 5 of the Royal Commission submission form outlines the different options about confidentiality of submissions. These are public, which means that the submission could be used on the website as well as in the Royal Commission reports. Number 2, anonymous yet public. So that means it could be used on the Royal Commission website, in their reports, in a de-identified way. Number 3, anonymous yet not published. So what this means is that the submission is not put on the website, is not used in any commission reports or materials. Number 4, restricted. And what this option means is that it can't be published, paraphrased, or referred to in any Royal Commission document, report, so forth. Regardless of whether a person selects number 1 or 2, sometimes the Royal Commission will not publish the submission in its entirety. What they might do is they might quote or paraphrase some of the submission or all of it, or they might turn the submission into a narrative in a de-identified way that doesn't identify the author. Also, Kerry, even if you select number 4, after the Royal Commission ends in April 2022, at the moment, submissions can be accessed at that stage in the event that somebody makes a Freedom of Information request. The Federal Parliament needs to amend the law for that to change. So the takeaway here is, in the event that you're completing the Royal Commission submission form, it's important to check pages 4 and 5 and complete that. In the event that you're making your own submission or, say, a video recording, it's important to explicitly state what choice you're making and how you'd like the Royal Commission to use your submission. So for Samir, what your story would do there is we would give him advice about his options and about how they relate to his concerns about being sued and denied access to medical services in the future. In the event that he's using his own submission form, he might want to write confidential at the top of each page, or clearly mark the certain paragraphs and sections that he wants kept confidential. In the event that he's doing a video, he might start by actually saying, I'd like you to make this submission restricted. And so it's important just to be really clear about exactly how you want the Royal Commission to use your submission.
Great. Thanks, Rachel. We actually had a question about that, but then it got answered, so that's fantastic. There's another question here. In the first hearing, Ronald Sackville stated that the Commission was attempting to have changes made to the law so that information could be protected after 2022. Does Rachel think this is realistic? I don't know if you want to answer that.
Tough question, probably one that I can't answer, but he did say that, and so I think that's more of a watch this space, really.
Yeah. So the next question is, can you attach the form to a written submission using the form to state your confidentiality preferences? So using the Disability Royal Commission form just to state those, but do your submission in another format. Is that okay?
Yep, of course you can. Yep, of course you can. And you can then circle your choice, highlight your choice, just so long as you make it clear.
Okay, fantastic. So Rachel, this is the last step in the process. It looks like our timing's going well. What is your advice for people before they press the submit button on the Royal Commission form, or send that email, or put that stamped letter into the post box?
We often find, Kerry, that clients who have sought some legal advice early on, before they start pulling together their story, come back to us again and say, here's my draft submission. I have some questions there about page 2, or I have some questions about the legal advice that you talked to me about 6 months ago, and I'm just not really sure. So what I would encourage people to do, and advocates as well, in the event that they have any questions or concerns at the end of the process, let us know, and then what we can do is talk about those before the submission is sent in.
Okay. Someone's written here, hi, I'm an advocate. I've been asked by someone who wants to make a submission if there are computers available that they could borrow to write it out. I've found this with a few people who cannot afford data plans or computers. Do you know if there's resources available, Rachel?
I'm not sure about that. That might be something to make some inquiries directly with the Royal Commission about.
Okay. And there's another question here. Is the Disability Royal Commission legal team present in private sessions?
That would, again, be a question to ask the private sessions team with the Royal Commission. As I said before, we are separate and we're not a part of the Royal Commission. So our role is to give that independent legal advice about how people can safely share their story. So that question I would recommend probably directing to the Royal Commission.
Okay. So Rachel, now this is, tell us how we can get in touch with your story.
So the best way to get in touch and to make an appointment is to call us on our information line, 1800 77 1800. You can also use the contact us form on our website, and we've popped our website there. We have advice appointments Monday to Friday between 9 a.m. and 5 o'clock. as I've said before, we're happy to have support people come, as well as disability advocates. Additionally, in the event that an advocate or a client is just not sure about a certain set of circumstances or not sure if they need legal advice, then we encourage them to still call us and have a chat to our information line and talk about this. We'll also, Kerry, in the event that we can't help somebody with their legal problem or question, or for example, say that it doesn't relate to the Royal Commission, we'll work to make a warm referral to a lawyer who can help. I'd certainly encourage everyone listening today to check out our website as well. It's got a lot of resources, including fact sheets on there that have very recently made their way up. So have a look, because there's certainly some helpful things that I recommend people to have a read. Now, saying that, the fact sheets are not legal advice, so they're not tailored to individual circumstances. So they're certainly not a substitute for calling us and making an advice appointment. And as you said before, Kerry, we've got that ideas for preparing your submission document attached here as a handout, and we'll circulate that as well after. Our resources, as well as these ideas for preparing your submission document, are general. They're designed, however, to give some tips and information and some initial ideas.
Okay, thanks, Rachel. I've got a few questions here. Someone's asked if we were able to send all these topics of discussion today by email. There is a copy of the presentation on your control panel, but if you are unable to download that, when you get the email after the webinar with all the links, if you want a copy of that email too, just reply to that email and we'll send you a copy. We've got a question here. If a person with a disability has received compensation about a particular issue, are they able to talk about this in their submission to the Royal Commission?
It really depends on that person's particular circumstances, and it depends on, in the event there's some sort of court order or confidentiality agreement. So what I would recommend there is talking to us, and then we can explain how to safely share their story. So it's not a no, but I recommend talking to us so that we can give some individual advice there.
Somebody's also asked a question about when would you recommend to use a table of contents in your submission?
That's a really helpful idea, and it's a really useful one to set it out. So I would certainly use it in the event that your submission is over a few pages.
And someone's asked, oh, sorry.
Up to you. No, again, it's up to you if you use it or not.
And someone's asked, is there any limits on the number of advice sessions a person or their advocate can get from your story?
No, there's no limit. We find that for some, they like to have shorter appointments. For some, they like to talk it all out. So there's no limit on the amount of advice appointments.
And someone's singing your praises. They've already been in touch with your story and they say you're amazing.
Oh, that's always lovely to have that feedback.
And then someone said, can you please talk a little bit about applying to the Disability Royal Commission for a notice to produce? Is that something?
That's something that we have a lot of questions about. So that's something that we might put down as an idea to talk about next time. But if you would like to get some individual advice about that, give us a call. Certainly something that we can chat through.
Okay. So, Rachel, we're close to the end of our webinar. If people were only going to remember 2 key things from this webinar, what are they up on the slide there?
It's really, Kerry, there's many different ways that you can share your story and that you can prepare a submission. There's no one right way. And we're here and we're a free, independent legal advice and support service, and we're here to chat through individual circumstances and to give people advice on how to safely share their story. And otherwise, just have a look at our resources, because there's some useful things that you might want to print off and have a look at.
That's right. So as we've said a few times, there's resources attached here on the control panel. There'll be links in the email that come out to you after the webinar, about an hour. It goes out, so don't worry. So now we're just going to have a look at some of the final questions that people have got here for you, Rachel. What have I got? Someone said, I'd like to know more about obtaining a notice to produce and understand if they're difficult to obtain. But like you said, people can call you about that, can't they, Rachel? And then we might put together a webinar about that as well. I have a client who wants to make a submission, and if about and funding for people, because they don't, something about funding of people, because they don't provide further funding for people to receive ongoing related counselling. Would this be considered an instance of neglect where services aren't being properly funded to support the people, their clients? What do you think, Rachel?
It's certainly a story that you can share. So, and it sounds like, yeah. So it's certainly a story that you can share.
Okay. And if people want a private session, do they need to put in a written submission first?
No. It's a matter of registering with the Royal Commission, and their private sessions team will have a talk to you about it. Private sessions as well are certainly a key area where your story can provide advice and some in terms of getting ready for one.
Okay. Someone's asked another question about non-disclosure agreements. They're just wanting to know what sort of circumstances are they used in? Is there a long list, or is it?
Just generally, they're sometimes used at the end of a court matter when some sort of a result is reached. It could be used when 2 parties reach agreement about how to resolve a disagreement and some compensations paid or some other result. There's lots of different areas and circumstances. But if you've got questions about that, let us know, and we can certainly chat to you about that.
Okay. Someone has asked, have you had many people request help with video recordings? I think I read that all recordings are then transcribed into words by the Commission before they're read. Is that right?
I couldn't answer that, as that would be something for the Royal Commission. However, I certainly have had clients who talk to me about a video submission, some who do part of their submission in writing and then say record themselves talking about their hopes and recommendations. So our role is really to give that legal advice and legal support, but then what happens after it's sent into the Royal Commission would have to be a question for the Royal Commission.
Okay, thank you, Rachel. And there's one note here that Interrelate, an organisation that offers ongoing counselling support for anyone affected by the Disability Royal Commission, and they have offices across New South Wales. I think there's on the Royal Commission website, there's information about services that offer additional support, isn't there?
Yes, there is. There is.
Okay, well, I think we're coming to the end of our webinar. Just one more question. Can advocates tell stories about the personal effects of vicarious trauma experienced through being alongside people who are treated badly by services in the community?
Yes, yes, of course. However, what I said before about if you're planning on specifically identifying clients, then it's would be important to get their consent. However, in the event that you're talking in a de-identified way, sure, and that's something that we're happy for you to talk to us about in the event that that's useful to you.
Great, thank you. Okay, so thanks very much, Rachel, for sharing your tips and suggestions about preparing submissions with everyone today. Thanks, Tanya, for all your interpreting today. We
Thank
really
you.
appreciate it. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. As I mentioned earlier, when we close the webinar, you'll receive a survey, and we really appreciate your feedback and ideas for future webinars. And then in about an hour, you'll get an email with links to all the information and resources we've talked about today. And on the slide now, you can see the email address for the Community Legal Education branch at Legal Aid New South Wales. And if you're watching this as a recorded webinar, just send us an email if you have any questions, and we'll pass them on to Your Story, or give Your Story a call, and you can see their phone number up there, 1800 771 800. So we'll say goodbye now, and we look forward to seeing you again in the future. Okay, bye Rachel, bye
Thanks.
Tanya, and everyone's saying thanks. Bye.